They told me life was simple. Follow the rules. Smile when you're told. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. And if you're lucky, die quietly without causing trouble. That's what they called peace. But it wasn't peace. It was sedation. It was obedience dressed in gold. They don't teach you to dream. They teach you to behave. From the moment you take your first breath, they start building your cage. Soft walls made of advice. Chains forged in kindness. And you thank them for it. You thank them for your prison, because they call it a good life. Be humble. Be patient. Don't question. Don't raise your voice. Don't be angry. Don't want too much. Don't be too much. And I listened. I tried. God, I tried. I folded myself into a smaller version of who I was meant to be. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I forgave when I wanted to fight. And I called it growth. They told me to kneel before comfort, to seek approval instead of power, to call fear wisdom and silence maturity. But deep inside, something burned. A soundless fire. A storm without thunder. It was the part of me they couldn't tame. The part that knew kneeling was a slow kind of death. They said, stay humble. But what they meant was, stay small. They said, be grateful. What they meant was, don't ask for more. They said, be patient. But patience was their way of making me wait for a permission that would never come. I used to think silence was strength, that holding your tongue made you noble, that swallowing your anger made you wise. But now I see. They'll call your obedience virtue and your silence wisdom. But it's a lie. A beautiful, suffocating lie. Because when you kneel long enough, you start to mistake the floor for home. You start believing the air down there is enough to breathe. You start thinking the weight on your shoulders is love. But I've seen the truth. I've tasted freedom even inside the cage. And once you've tasted it, you can never go back to crawling. Freedom doesn't come with permission. It comes with rebellion. It's not given, it's taken. It's not clean. It's bloody. And it always costs something. Because to rise, you must first betray the version of yourself that bowed. So I stopped apologizing. I stopped waiting. I stopped asking the world to make room for me. and I began taking space. They said I changed. They were right. Because the man they knew was taught to kneel. But the man I've become was built to break chains. I am not here to be liked. I am not here to be understood. I am here to remember what it feels like to breathe fire again. The silence that once caged me now answers to me. They called me defiant. They called me dangerous. They called me mad. And maybe I am. Because sanity in a world of slaves is just another form of surrender. So if madness means standing tall when the world demands you crawl, then I will be mad forever. Because they taught me to bow. Until I learned that kings don't kneel. They rise. They say prisons have walls. Mine didn't. Mine had people, smiling faces, soft words, rules disguised as love, expectations dressed like care. That's how they build your cell. Not with steel, but with comfort. They feed you validation until you forget how to feed yourself. They say they love you, but only the version of you that obeys. And slowly, you trade your freedom for approval. You trade your roar for a pat on the back. You trade your crown for applause. It starts small. You bite your tongue to keep the peace. You agree just to belong. You hide your hunger because they call it too much. And before you know it, you're wearing chains that feel like home. They tell you what's right, what's possible, what's realistic. They hand you a script and call it destiny. Go to school. Get a job. Pay bills. Be grateful. Grow old. Die quietly. And you follow it. Because everyone else does. You think they must know something you don't. But deep down, something screams, this isn't it. You weren't made for this monotony. You weren't made for this polite decay. You were made for chaos, for conquest, for creation. But the system has a trick. It teaches you to fear your own power. They tell you ambition is greed. Rage is immaturity. Desire is sin. Pride is evil. And you believe them. Because it's easier to be accepted than exiled. That's how they keep you on your knees. Not with force, with guilt. They make you believe obedience is virtue. They convince you that rebellion is wrong. They brainwash you into thinking you're broken for wanting more. You become forgotten where you came from. No, I just remembered who I was before you taught me to kneel. You see, betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes, it comes from those who fear your potential. The moment they see your fire, they'll try to drown it with doubt. Not because they hate you, but because they see what they could have been if they'd had your courage. So they project their fear onto you. They mock your vision. They laugh at your hunger. They call your solitude arrogance. They call your standards pride. And little by little, if you're not careful, you start believing them. You start trimming your edges to fit their dull world. You start dimming your light so their eyes don't burn. You start kneeling again, out of habit. But make no mistake, every compromise is a chain. Every apology for being yourself is a shackle. Every time you silence your truth, you surrender your crown. And the cruelest part, you forget you were ever free. You learn to live inside limits that were never real. You start calling your cage destiny, and you decorate it with comfort. You hang pictures of approval on the walls. You call the noise peace. That's how a king dies before he's even born. But even prisoners dream. Even slaves hear the call of rebellion in their bones. And I heard it one night when everything was quiet. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just honest. A whisper from the darkness that said, "You've been kneeling for so long, you've forgotten how to stand." That's when I realized I wasn't living. I was performing. A puppet on invisible strings, applauded for being empty. And I couldn't do it anymore, because I was not built to please. I was not born to kneel. I was designed. There comes a moment when the silence stops protecting you. When being humble starts to feel like being buried alive. When patience becomes poison. I reached that moment, that edge, that point where you either break or ignite. I had spent years swallowing my fire, convincing myself that calm meant control, that being good meant being silent. But all that silence ever did was suffocate me slowly. Because the truth is, some of us weren't made to stay calm. Some of us were made to burn, to destroy illusions, to tear down everything false, even if it means standing in the ruins alone. And I realized I wasn't angry at the world. I was angry at myself for obeying, for shrinking, for kneeling to people who didn't deserve the sight of my lowered head. That's the cruel irony. You think the world betrayed you, but it was you who betrayed yourself first. Every time you stayed silent when you wanted to roar. Every time you settled when your soul screamed for more. Every time you accepted less just to keep others comfortable. That's betrayal. Not of them, of you. And that betrayal burns deeper than any wound. So one night, I stopped pretending. I looked in the mirror and didn't see a victim. I saw a weapon, rusted, forgotten, but still deadly. And I swore I would sharpen again, no matter how long it took, no matter how much it hurt, no matter who I lost along the way. Because I'd rather be alone in truth than surrounded by those who love my lies. They told me rage was evil, but they never understood what rage really is. Rage isn't chaos, it's clarity. It's every suppressed truth screaming to finally be heard. Every insult was a match. Until one day, I didn't just hold the fire, I became it. And once you become the fire, you stop begging for light. I remember the first time I said no and didn't explain myself. It felt like violence. It felt like freedom. Because the moment you stop justifying your truth, you start living it. I realized the cage door was never locked. It was my fear that kept me inside. My doubt that whispered, "You're not ready." My guilt that said, "You'll hurt them if you rise." But here's the truth. You will hurt them. You'll hurt the ones who benefit from your silence. You'll scare the ones who only loved you weak. You'll lose the ones who only wanted your obedience. And that's okay. Because you can't build a kingdom with people who prefer cages. Freedom demands sacrifice. And sometimes, that sacrifice is who you used to be. I buried that old version of me. The obedient one. The apologetic one. The one who bowed to survive. I buried him with my old fears. My old guilt. My old self-pity. And from his grave, I rose unrecognizable. Not healed. Not pure. Not holy. Just real. And real is dangerous. Because you can't control a man who's done pretending. You can't manipulate someone who's made peace with being misunderstood. You can't break someone who's already rebuilt himself from ashes. That's when I understood the truth. I was never broken. I was forged, shaped by every wound, refined by every betrayal, tempered by every night I spent screaming into the dark. And I realized something else. Freedom is, there's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It whispers. It sits behind your ribs like a quiet storm, waiting for the right betrayal to set it free. And mine came from the ones I trusted most. Not enemies, not strangers. No, the ones who swore they'd never leave. The ones who smiled while slowly tightening the chains around my throat. Betrayal doesn't come from the dark. It comes from the hand you held in the light. I remember their faces, their words, their eyes pretending to understand me while secretly praying I'd fail. They didn't stab me in the back. They stood in front of me and watched me burn. And when I fell, they called it my fault. They said I was too much, too intense, too ambitious, too loud. Funny thing, the world always calls you too much, right before it realizes it can't control you. That was the day I stopped expecting loyalty from the weak. Because weak hearts love you only until your strength reminds them of their cowardice. The night I was betrayed, something inside me shattered. Not just trust, not just hope, something deeper. It felt like dying without a grave, like watching your reflection crack until you can't tell who's left. And in that moment of ruin, I saw it. The truth. Pain doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. It strips away illusions, mercy, comfort, until only the real you remains. And the real me was not a victim. He was a weapon, forgotten, buried, now reawakening. They thought they ended me. They didn't. They summoned me. Every betrayal is a ritual. Every heartbreak, a baptism. Every scar, a rebirth mark. The night they left, I learned something sacred. That the only thing more powerful than love, but clean, broken, but free. There's a kind of purity in ruin. When there's nothing left to lose, you finally see what was never yours to begin with. And in that emptiness, you find creation. Because to be reborn, you must first be destroyed. To rise, you must first collapse. To rule, you must first be forgotten. That's the truth they never told us. The rise always begins in the grave. So I built again, not from hope, from hunger, not from peace, from fury. Every scar became a scripture, every tear a tool, every scream a song of resurrection. I rebuilt myself, brick by brick. But this time, each brick was carved from pain. And I didn't use mortar. I used will. The will to never kneel again. The will to never need saving. The will to become my own God in the ruins of what they destroyed. They say pain changes people. It doesn't. It reveals who was hiding underneath all along. It reveals the man behind the mask. The one who doesn't ask for mercy. The one who doesn't seek validation. The one who walks alone and doesn't tremble. That man was always there. He just needed to lose everything to meet himself. And I met him that night in the ashes. In the silence, in the emptiness that once felt unbearable. I met the version of me who didn't kneel because there was no one left to kneel for. And that's when I understood. Freedom doesn't come when you win. It comes when you no longer care who wins. When you stop proving. When you stop chasing. When you stop begging the world to... There comes a moment when pain stops hurting. When it starts teaching. When rage stops burning blindly and starts carving purpose into your bones. That's when the chains start to rattle. You can hear it. The sound of old beliefs cracking. The sound of your fear losing its grip. The sound of every I can't dying quietly in the corner. It's not just rebellion. It's resurrection. Because breaking chains isn't about defying others. It's about remembering yourself. Every man is born free, but somewhere along the way, he's taught to kneel, taught to obey, taught to dim his fire to keep others warm. But I have burned enough for others. Now I burn for myself. They told me to be careful, to play safe, to think small, to fit in. But safety is a prison with velvet walls, and comfort is just the enemy wearing perfume. I was not made for comfort. I was made for conquest. I was not made to blend in. I was made to shatter everything ordinary. So I took every word they used to chain me and turned it into a weapon. They said, "You're too angry." I said, "Good. Anger is my compass. It points toward what I was meant to change." They said, "You're too intense." I said, "Of course. Intensity is what separates kings from sheep." They said, "You're too much." I said, "Exactly. Because too much is the name they give to those who won't fit inside their cages." That's how I broke the first chain, by realizing I was never broken, only bound. And when I stopped apologizing for my power, it stopped hiding from me. That's the secret they never tell you. Your freedom doesn't come when they release you. It comes when you stop asking to be released. When you decide that even if the world stays chained, permission. When you reach that point, they can't manipulate you anymore. They can't guilt you. They can't shame you. Because shame only works on those who still seek belonging. But I belong to nothing but my purpose now. I stopped chasing approval. I started chasing alignment. I stopped chasing applause. I started chasing peace. Not the peace they sell. The peace that's earned when you fight your demons and win. You want to break chains? Then stop fighting the world. Start fighting your weakness. Start fighting your fear. Start fighting the part of you that still asks, will they understand? They won't. And they don't have to. This rise was never meant to be understood. It was meant to be witnessed. Because every man who breaks free becomes a mirror, and mirrors terrify the blind. I don't want to be loved by everyone. I want to be remembered by those who understand the fire. And if I must walk alone, then let it be through the ruins of my old self. I am not here to live softly. I am here to roar, even if my voice echoes through an empty kingdom. Because even an empty kingdom is better than a crowded cage, and I swear I will never kneel again. Not to love, not to comfort, not to fear, not to fate. Because I realized something sacred. The gods don't bless those who kneel. They bless those who rise in defiance. I wasn't born to serve crowns. I was born to forge them. I wasn't born to beg for light. I was born to set the sky on fire. The chains they gave me, I wear them now as armor. Each one a reminder of how far I've come. Each scar a scripture written by survival. And when they see me now, they don't see a man. They see a storm they created but could never control. I am not free because they freed me. There comes a moment when the storm inside you finally stops raging. not because it's over, but because you've become it. I no longer chase peace. I am peace. Not the gentle kind, the kind that comes after war. I've learned that the world doesn't bow to anger or love or pain. It bows to power. Not power over others, power over yourself. That's what I became. A man no longer ruled by emotion, but guided by it. A man no longer drowning in pain, but breathing it like air. The boy who once trembled in silence is gone. The man who rose from the ruins answers to no one. Because I learned the law of kings. Before you command the world, you must first command your reflection. That's the throne every man must claim. The one inside his own mind. Once I took that throne, the noise of the world became nothing but echoes. Opinions faded. Distractions dissolved. The crowd's voice became irrelevant because I no longer needed their applause. I had my own roar. It's strange how power changes you. You stop explaining yourself. You stop chasing closure. You stop trying to convince the blind to see. You simply become the proof of what they doubted. Every scar I carry is no longer a wound. It's armor. Every betrayal I endured is no longer pain. It's prophecy. They said I'd break. They were right. But they didn't understand what breaking does to men like me. When I shatter, I don't fall apart. I multiply. Each fragment becomes another version of me. Sharper, colder, hungrier, more precise. That's the rise of the unbroken. The rise of those who've been destroyed enough times to learn that destruction is a form of birth. Challenge is a slow death. And I am not here to fade. I am here to reign. But this reign isn't over others. It's over my past, my doubts, my fears. That's the true throne. Not one made of gold, but one forged from scars. When I walk now, I don't rush. Kings don't hurry. When I speak, I don't shout. My silence weighs more than their noise. I've seen men who are loud in their rise, but quiet in their fall. I've seen men who built empires for applause, but none for peace. I build differently. I build in shadows. I build in silence. Because when it's time to unveil, there will be no competition left standing. The unbroken rise without warning. We don't need validation. We are the validation. They used to laugh at my stillness. Now they call it power. They used to mock my solitude. Now they call it discipline. Funny how they only respect what they once ridiculed. When it starts to work. But I don't need their recognition anymore. Because I learned. Recognition is the weakest form of power. Respect is stronger. But self-respect is divine. And mine cannot be taken. The throne I built doesn't exist in the world. It exists inside me. And no man alive can overthrow that kingdom. My silence became my crown. My pain became my sword. My rage became my law. Now, when I look back at the man I was, I don't feel pity. I feel gratitude. Because without his pain, I would have never found my purpose. Without his obedience, I would have never tasted rebellion. Without his collapse, I would have never learned. They say when you finally rise, the world looks smaller. They're right. Not because the world changed, but because you did. I look around now and see the same faces, the same systems, the same voices trying to chain me with opinions. But they no longer reach me. Their words don't pierce. Their noise doesn't echo. Because I've risen too high for their frequencies. Once, their judgment used to burn me. Now, it amuses me. Once, their betrayal used to break me. Now, it builds me. Once, their absence used to hurt. Now, it honors me. Because absence is the gift of the gods. It shows you who never deserved to stand beside your rise. I don't hate them anymore. I thank them. For every blade, every lie, every door they slammed. Because every betrayal was a lesson in disguise. Every rejection was a direction. Every ending was an initiation. You see, they thought they were burying me under defeat. But they were just giving me soil to grow a kingdom. And now, I stand above it all. The world beneath my feet. Not conquered by force. Conquered by evolution. I didn't destroy them. I outgrew them. And that's the kind of victory they'll never understand. Because vengeance fades. But growth, that's eternal. The man I was, the obedient one, the broken one, the desperate one. He died quietly, From his bones, I built my throne. And every time I look down, I don't see enemies. I see teachers. Each one a chapter in the scripture of my rise. The world beneath my feet is not a battlefield anymore. It's a reflection, a reminder of where I came from and becoming. And I've become. When I walk now, the ground remembers. When I speak, the silence listens. Because everything around me recognizes something it can't name. Authority. Earned. Not inherited. They thought I wanted revenge. But revenge is for the desperate. I wanted balance. To make peace with the chaos that raised me. And I have. The fire inside me no longer burns recklessly. It moves with purpose. It creates instead of destroys. It warms instead of devours. Because power without mercy is tyranny. And I was never here to be a tyrant. I was here to prove that even the broken can become divine. I've built my throne in silence. No crown, no audience, no praise. Just me, my scars, my creed. Now when they see me, they see calm. But beneath that calm, there's war. A war I already won. The greatest victory isn't conquering others. It's conquering yourself so completely that nothing outside you can disturb your peace again. And that's where I live now. Above it all. Not in arrogance. In awareness. I see them still kneeling for acceptance. Still chained by fear. Still mistaking obedience for wisdom. Still calling their cages destiny. And I feel no anger. Because I was once there. I know how it feels to be blind in a world that praises blindness. But I also know this. When the time comes, they will remember my silence. They will recall my fall. They will see my rise. And they will whisper, "He didn't kneel. He never did." That's the legacy I leave. Not a crown, not wealth, not followers, just proof. There comes a silence after victory, a stillness the world cannot comprehend. It is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of becoming. Because once the war ends, you realize the enemy was never out there. It was always you. Your fear. Your doubt. Your hunger to be seen. Your need to be loved by those who never loved themselves. I have killed that man. the one who begged, the one who knelt, the one who mistook kindness for weakness. He served his purpose. He suffered so I could see. He bled so I could rise. And now what remains is something else. Not human, not divine. Something in between. A creature born of betrayal and silence. Forged in fire and molded by loss. Crowned in solitude. Fed by purpose. Driven by prophecy. I am not what the world wanted me to be. I am what the world created me to become. This is the creed of the unbowed. Never kneel. Not to men. Not to fear. Not even to fate. Because fate belongs to those who dare rewrite it in blood. Never beg. Because what's meant for you will never require pleading. It will require power. And you have it. Buried beneath years of lies told by cowards who feared your reflection. Never break. Because the world only wins when you stay shattered. Glue yourself together with rage, with discipline, with silence, and stand again, even if you tremble. Pain is not your curse. It's your code. The language through which the universe speaks to its chosen. Every wound is an instruction. Every scar is a map. Every failure is every failure echo like prophecy. Let every drop of sweat remind you, you were not built to obey. You were built to overcome. When they ask what drives you, tell them it's not rage. It's resurrection. When they ask what you fear, tell them nothing that bleeds. When they ask why you walk alone, tell them because silence follows kings, and kings do not walk in crowds. And when the night falls again, because it will, and the world tries to break you once more, remember this creed. You've already been through worse. You've already walked through fire. You've already died once. Now rise. Not to prove them wrong, but to remind yourself who you've become. Because you were never born to kneel. You were built to break chains, to melt crowns, to burn illusions, to forge empires from pain. And when your name fades, when your story becomes legend, let them remember this one truth. I wasn't born to kneel. I was built to break chains and to forge crowns from what tried to cage me.